You are listening to Talking Star Wars. Welcome.
I'm Alex,
I'm Connor.
and today we're going to talk about Star Wars.
And specifically, we're going to hold one of our Force Powers episodes.
Yep, and today we're going to look at the Jedi Mind Trick, the ethics of the mind trick, the variations from the simple bit of confusion to the force domination practiced by the Sith, and what exactly it means for someone to be weak-willed or affected by this power.
And also, if the mind trick is something that is a moral Jedi, um, not attack, but if it's a normal Jedi tool, or if it's something that is a little bit gray as far as ethics go.
Yeah, so for the mind trick, it is one of the first force powers we ever see being used in the original trilogy. Obi-Wan Kenobi, when with Luke in A New Hope, is journeying through Mos Eisley and they are stopped by stormtroopers. He is able to easily overpower the minds of the stormtroopers using the Force and allow them to go on by. He does not use the power maliciously, nor to do anything other than for survival, but he does certainly almost puppet these stormtroopers with rather relative ease, making them repeat words, clouding their minds, where they don't even realize until much later what they have done. So it is whatever we look at for the ethics going forward, Connor, I would say it is certainly superseding someone's free will,
Mm-hmm.
changing their ability to make decisions by simply using the Force to cloud their senses and obey the wishes of the Force user.
And in this first instance, the stormtroopers aren't necessarily going to cause themselves harm or cause each other harm. Nothing exactly negative is happening other than them failing to do their job properly in informing the Empire that there are certain droids about. But it's still one of those actions that's, like you said, it's enforcing one's will upon someone else, which if we're taking a look at the Jedi and their stance on the Force, it seems like they shouldn't be placing their will above someone else's. But I guess in this case it is for the greater good, so that Luke and Obi-Wan can escape the stormtroopers unnoticed.
Yeah, and I would say if we look at ethically at the Jedi, then as we continue, they're certainly more about the health of an overall society or group than they are about someone's personal volition.
Mm-hmm.
They are more than willing to commit violence, to use the Jedi mind trick, as long as it's in service towards the greater good,
Mm-hmm.
which is one reason I believe they are become relatively fragile and easily suborned during the Clone Wars, would be this sort of dichotomy between we are dedicated to light and truth and the will of the Force, but we also have these great powers that let us remove choices from others, and how increasingly casually they are used. Because let's look at other instances where
Yeah.
the Jedi mind trick is used.
We get to Luke in Return of the Jedi. I think it's the next canonical instance of a Jedi mind trick where he is entering Jabba's palace and talking to the guy with the tentacles on his head, Bib Fortuna. And he,
A Twi'lek, if we
yes.
look at our previous episodes, Connor, please.
Yes. Well, it doesn't change the fact that he's got tentacles on his
Those are
head.
called Leku, and you're being racist.
Well, Mr. Leku gets Jedi mind tricked into leading Luke to Jabba, but that same kind of Jedi mind trick would not work on a Hutt.
Yeah, in fact, Jabba the Hutt, who has a relatively disciplined mind and has been alive for hundreds of years, is disgusted that his major domo has been so easily taken over by what who Jabba probably sees as a baby Jedi.
Yeah.
It's like, you weak-willed fool! He's using the Jedi mind trick. In Huttese to Bib Fortuna, and Luke, who had been relying on that trick to get him by, including with Jabba, proves himself, yes, he is a Beta Jedi and is captured, but he has a contingency plan for that.
And a contingency plan for that, and a contingency plan for that. It's a
Yeah,
very complex plan at Jabba's palace.
yeah. Let's never say that Luke Skywalker is like Han Solo when he goes without plans. Luke just has lots of plans of varying quality. Um, but yeah, this is the second instance we see that a Jedi mind trick being used, presumably learned with his studies in between episodes 5 and 6.
Mhm.
We do not see the Jedi mind trick used at all in The Empire Strikes Back. Now, Darth Vader certainly could have, if he had wished to, mentally dominated many people, but he preferred to let fear do that work for him.
And he preferred to just physically dominate people by choking them, which you can see in one of our previous episodes on the Force choke.
Yeah, so those are really the two instances we see the Jedi mind trick used in the original trilogy. So it is literally the first Force power that we see used, other than perhaps a Force heal, if you count what Obi-Wan did for Luke after being attacked by the Tusken Raiders, or perhaps making the noise that scares them off. But then getting into Mos Eisley, we see Obi-Wan displaying this knowledge immediately.
Mm-hmm.
Then we go to the prequel trilogy.
And Qui-Gon Jinn plays fast and loose with the Jedi mind trick. It's a shortcut for him to get through his many obstacles. He uses it in the Gungan city with Boss Nass convincing him to just give away a boat for free. But again, he tries to pull the Jedi mind trick on Watto, and it seems like Watto would be one of these weak mind uh, victims to the Jedi mind trick. But he's clever. His species is somehow either immune, or Watto himself is skilled and experienced enough around the block to be able to deflect Qui-Gon's manipulations.
Yeah, and this goes back to there are races, but more so there are individuals who are resistant to the mind trick, and to force the Jedi mind trick and the mind probe further into them could cause permanent damage, which is something that Qui-Gon ethically is not willing to do. Uh, he will then have a slave boy engage in a dangerous death race of his own volition,
Mm-hmm.
rather than force potential mental damage on the slave owner that owns the child.
Which you could learn more about in our episode on Qui-Gon Jinn. This is the episode to reference all other episodes, I guess.
Yes, so I think this is both intended to show Qui-Gon. He's like, I will Jedi mind trick a head of state if I have to pursue my mission. I also attempt to use it on every obstacle I come across, but he's not willing to cut down Boss Nass with his lightsaber, nor make threats, and he's not willing to mentally damage someone. The same cannot be said for Mace Windu, as seen in the Clone Wars, when Cad Bane, the bounty hunter who is working for Darth Sidious, has stolen some Jedi property and has hostages. So in the middle of that arc, we have a team of Obi-Wan Kenobi, Anakin Skywalker, and Mace Windu, all using the Jedi mind trick to force information out of Cad Bane, very much against his will, while he struggles, knowing that it could cause him permanent mental damage. Now, this bounty hunter at this point has murdered about more than a dozen people, stolen property, and is working for their enemy during wartime. But it is still disturbing, and the fact that Anakin is the one who suggests it, and Mace Windu goes along with it, I think is intended as a signpost of both Anakin's mental state and the state of the Jedi Order.
They're willing to maybe bend their morality just a little bit. And like you said, Cad Bane is not Padme Amidala. Cad Bane is now no innocent, but it's still, I would say, the Jedi crossing the line as far as forcing someone to give up information, to give up part of themselves when they otherwise would not. We would also be remiss in forgetting the Attack of the Clones instance of the Jedi mind trick, which is quite possibly the funniest moment of all of the prequel trilogies, and maybe all of Star Wars.
Yes, we can't bypass Obi-Wan showing, the first time on screen he uses the Jedi mind trick, where he is approached by a drug dealer in a Coruscant cantina who attempts to sell him death sticks, and he tells the man, "You don't want to sell me death sticks." And when Obi-Wan doing the mind trick, the man repeats the phrase, "I don't want to sell you death sticks. You want to go home and rethink your life." And he leaves to rethink his life.
And this is, I would say, quite an ethical use of the mind trick, because selling drugs is a criminal activity, as many would point out, and going home to rethink one's life might lead that man to quite more of a positive life, or at least better decisions.
Well, and it's certainly a scene that's played for laughs,
Mm-hmm.
and that you're supposed to find it funny that Obi-Wan, who is trying to find this murderer, or attempted murderer at this point, from their crashed speeder, is then just needs this person to go away. But, if we delve a little deeper into that, I think it's also the Jedi have arrived in a part of the city they don't normally arrive at.
Mhm.
Coruscant is a city plagued by economic inequality, and here's this person who just identifies, oh, hey, this rich stranger's coming. I'm going to try to sell him some of my product,
Hmm.
and Obi-Wan just casually making the person go away. It's like, we're trying to save the senator from the higher echelons of society that has been attempted to be assassinated in an act of high politics. But yeah, there's all this economic inequality going around here. Should I just tell this person to rethink their life? What has forced them to this life of poverty? Star
Hmm.
Wars typically does not grapple with such questions, and instead let's use the Jedi mind trick to make this person go away.
Hmm. In a humorous way, but in a way that will hopefully leave the world a better place. Um,
Yeah,
but
so
yeah.
yeah, and Obi-Wan is sort of our paragon of Jedihood, along
Hmm.
with Yoda, and Obi-Wan does not hesitate also to use the Jedi mind trick, often for Obi-Wan as a way of avoiding physical confrontation,
Hmm.
almost like the lesser of two evils, but he doesn't ever seem to grapple ethically with using the Force to nudge the weak-minded.
Nor does he use it necessarily to simply get what he wants. Like Obi-Wan Kenobi talking to the stormtroopers in A New Hope, there's no way he can get around that. Those are definitely the droids that the stormtroopers are looking for. The mind trick is necessary. Qui-Gon Jinn using the mind trick on Boss Nass, or trying to use it on Watto when words could be used otherwise, it has this air of superiority where it's, my will is more superior than yours. I'm going to enforce it, and, we'll just go about business. Obi-Wan Kenobi seems to use it more so as a tactic to uh, avoid confrontation, as you said, and also to minimize distraction.
Yeah, so then we get to I think that's the last usage of the Jedi mind trick that
Yeah.
we see in the prequel trilogy as well. Once the Clone Wars are well underway, the time for negotiations and delicate use of the Force has passed. And yet again, we see the Jedi mind probe and Jedi mind trick used in a few instances in the Clone Wars series as well,
Mhm.
particularly when Obi-Wan is trying to go undercover as a bounty hunter, but can't overtly use the Force. Clouds the minds of those around him when he needs to. But um, mostly then we go to the sequel trilogy when,
We have a Kylo Ren who can compel information without ever having the victim verbalize it. It's kind of a development of this mind trick where he is able to dig into someone's psyche and pull out images or messages. He does this with Poe Dameron. He somewhat succeeds in doing this with Rey until she's able to turn that power back on him. But it's a great way to show that he has taken this Force ability, which was nebulous to begin with, and has turned it into such a dark side ability because we could tell that the victims on the opposite end aren't going through a very positive experience when this information is being pulled from them.
yes, so the greater universe would call this Force Dominate or
Mhm.
the Force Probe. Kylo Ren obviously having adapted it from his training under Luke Skywalker, where he first learned probably the Jedi mind trick and is now using it to force information out of people in an agonizing way.
Mhm.
Some of the expanded universe material that has come out, both Legends and canon, would call this Force Dominate. It is a Sith trick.
Mhm.
Kylo Ren is not really a Sith, which is why it takes a different form. He's not puppeting people, but he's ripping information out of them. So it's
Mhm.
a little bit different in that way, since he's sort of a self-taught dark side user.
Mhm.
Um,
But this, along with stopping a blaster bolt in midair with the Force, goes to show that he's taken the Force and developed it. Whether he's done it personally or he's learned from Snoke, whomever, uh, the Force has changed, and not for the better.
yeah, and there are deliberate parallels, I believe, with Luke Skywalker and Kylo Ren, who, I mean, they're master and apprentice, literally, and also self-taught after losing their teacher,
Hmm.
which in Kylo Ren's choice was voluntary. And then he's deliberately only fed drips of information by Snoke in training, and so he's mostly got this lugging around this raw power and just using what he knows. So he freezes things in the air. He probes people, and he just sort of walks around, using his brute strength to overcome people without finesse that he might need otherwise.
Hmm.
Compare um, Luke Skywalker's entry in negotiations with Jabba the Hutt, where he just uses the Force to overwhelm the Gamorrean guards, and Bib Fortuna then reaches Jabba the Hutt and is overcome. Compared to Qui-Gon, who just has managed to use one touch of the Force to boss Nass and is sent on his way with everything he needs.
Mm.
Kylo Ren is sort of the same way. He's young, impetuous, and uses the Force as, the world is a nail and the Force is his hammer.
Mm.
Not even Darth Vader did that. Darth Vader was aware of the necessity of fear, of only using the Force when he needed to as his trump card. He was fought as Force choking people and Force pushing people, but he had been trained as a full Jedi, and so he had a full repertoire of tricks, whereas Kylo Ren has to increasingly fall back on the Force, having no other advantage over the people around him.
Mm-hmm. So then, taking a look, when we get media released after the sequel trilogy, we see the Inquisitor Reva commit some Force domination when it comes to pulling information from, I can't remember Kunal's name in the show, but he was a fake Jedi. She's able to mine the information of where Obi-Wan's going from him.
Yeah, so we see that Kylo Ren has adapted this from, a Sith trick again, some continuity of Force powers there, and again, it is shown as being incredibly painful. This is a more Sith trait where he does have to verbalize the response, rather than like the images being directly beamed into Reva's head.
Right.
And I think this also shows, along with Rey, who's able to use the Jedi Mind Trick in Episode 7 to get a stormtrooper to release her from her cell.
Mm-hmm.
I believe affecting the minds around you with the Force appears to be one of the earliest and easiest Force powers for anyone to use.
Mm-hmm.
Inquisitors are not particularly powerful in the Force, though Reva at least was a Padawan before she was turned into an Inquisitor.
Mm-hmm.
But we also see in Tales of the Jedi, Ahsoka Tano is literally a toddler, or just more than a toddler. She's able to use, it's a different Force power, but animal friendship, which is, forming a bond with a creature. It's the first Force power that she uses. So affecting, the less complex minds of animals appears to be one of the early Force powers a Force user can manifest. It is also one of the early Force powers that Ezra Bridger displays in Rebels.
Grogu as well in The Mandalorian. Maybe not one of the first powers he displays, but he does display a connection with animals. He's able to mentally dominate a Rancor for the benefit of Din and Boba Fett.
Yeah, but Grogu is never shown using the Jedi Mind Trick per se. Maybe because the damage done to him psychologically due to with his aphasia, his inability to speak. Perhaps he's really unable to interface his will with other people.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps he just never learned how because he was so young.
Mm-hmm.
So I never see Grogu utilize the Jedi Mind Trick in the deft way that Obi-Wan, Luke, Rey, Kylo Ren. Even when Grogu is giving it to more violent impulses, he goes towards the Force choke and not the Force dominate.
Which I would say, taking a look at the Force choke and a Force domination, because the Force choke was our last spotlight episode on Force powers. That is overtly Sith. I do feel like though the mind trick couldn't, while it is a tool wielded by the Jedi, it can also be utilized in a way that is far more exploitive than the Force choke, and can affect someone's will and someone's being in a way that is more negative than a simple physical side effect.
Yeah, there is a famous series of scenes in Knights of the Old Republic 2 where your player character who could have access to the Jedi Mind Trick or Force Dominate at this point. The powers in that game are called Force Persuade and Force Dominate, which are not inherently light or dark side. You can use them to bypass certain confrontations from either, forcing someone to give their credits to the less well off, to forcing them to jump to their deaths off of a balcony. And whatever option you choose, your mentor figure, who is a gray figure as they come at this point, shows you how anything you might have chosen to do with the Force in that instance resulted in a worse outcome for the person. If you persuaded them to better their life, it is noticed, and their lack of conformity is punished by their comrades. If you just simply force them to kill themselves, you have cut off their choices forever. If you give them credits yourself, they are then simply beaten and they are taken from them. So it is a sort of a reversal there of, the If your Jedi drifts into someone's life and uses the Force to make it easier for the Jedi, the detrimental effect that can have on those without such power in their lives, and is probably one of the more infamous parts of the game. Um, and definitely, avoiding the ludonarrative dissonance that might sometimes, oh, we just force dominated this person, now he's fine. It's like, no, you ruined their life, whatever you did, because you're awful. Then again, that's what your mentor says to you all the time in Knights of the Old Republic too. So, even though it is a Legends game, I thought it was worth bringing up.
Mhm. Well, I don't really know how to salvage this one from a downbeat ending, but
Yes,
that's kind of the par for the course when it comes to the mind trick and force domination.
yeah, and I do think we can get into a little bit of a broader discussion about the ethics of it. So I think we've seen all these
Mhm.
instances of the Force trick being used, and the situations in which Jedi have been used, and we've talked about how the Force itself is a tool almost, and that it is the way it is utilized that can separate a Jedi from a Sith,
Mhm.
someone who is twisted by the dark side to someone who is devoted to the light, or something in between. Though, as you know, Connor and I are not all aboard the, oh yeah, you can be a cool gray Jedi and use both sides of the Force. That leads to problematic cognitive dissonance
Mhm.
on the part of persons like, I just do some evil things. That means I'm a chaotic neutral, not evil. Um, but I think the Force trick is certainly could be explored more in this ethically
Mhm.
questionable area. It is removing the free will of other individuals. When it's used as a survival tactic, like such as Rey is literally being unjustly imprisoned, we are inclined to side with Rey, and this is the only tool she has to escape the situation. But I think the capacity, as Connor said earlier, for exploitation by mentally controlling other individuals is hard to avoid. But it's hard to avoid the fact that Jedi could physically dominate most people around them at any moment anyway.
Mhm.
So, is it better or worse to mentally dominate someone compared to kill them with your lightsaber? I think that's the Qui-Gon Jinn comes down to, yes, they might not like this, but it's better than me killing them. But I think there could be an argument made where suborning someone's will is worse.
And that it brings to mind, we brought up Obi-Wan Kenobi practicing the first on-screen Jedi mind trick. Moments after that, a scene after that, he disarms someone in a bar, and I'm pretty sure he kills someone else just for threatening Luke. So we bring up this idea of, it's better than, slashing, cutting someone down with a lightsaber. And Obi-Wan Kenobi's responsible for both in A New Hope. And it is a survivor's world, and, who knows, perhaps by causing a scene at Mos Eisley, it allowed for the other patrons to leave Obi-Wan Kenobi and his uh, compatriots alone so that they can go about their business. But it gets into this larger discussion of the Jedi and morality, which maybe needs an entirely different episode just to zone in on. But in a way, Jedi are still enforcing their will on the Force, even though it's really meant for them to be one with the Force, for them to live amongst it, and uh, the idea of the manipulation to use it to coerce someone or to just use it as a means of, I am more acrobatic and I'm more sensitive when it comes to my reflexes, so I'm going to take your arm for threatening someone. I don't know. It goes to show that the Jedi in the fall of the Republic were not perfect, and that they were a group that was suffering very much from internal decay. And it's really no surprise that Luke was unable to keep his order going because it's shaped so much in the way of the old order.
Yeah, made it in the image of a flawed organization, which we see the more we learn about Luke's Jedi Academy, the more we like Luke was a good person, but perhaps mimicking an unhealthy or less than ideal way to connect with the Force.
I almost see the Jedi themselves as gray because they're committing acts of violence for the sake of the betterment of not mankind, but living kind.
I would say that making the Jedi not pacifists and willing to engage in violence to defend against tyranny is not inherently a gray act.
Mhm.
Um, Star Wars often grapples with the question of if you are pacifist but need to rely on other people to commit violence to keep yourself from being overtaken by evil,
Mhm.
what's the value of your pacifism? So I do not think that the Jedi engage in violence to defend against evil, tyranny, and fascism makes them gray. But
It's a
I
necessary sacrifice for them to have to commit acts of violence in order to stop
yeah,
tyranny.
but I would say that having access to the powers that they do makes it much easier for a Jedi to become exploitative and fall to the dark side. They have access to powers and opportunity that the average individual does not, such as Pong Krell, Barriss Offee, um,
Count Dooku.
Taron Malicos. The list of fallen Jedi goes on. Anakin Skywalker,
Mhm.
and how they can then use those force powers to control and dominate other people, whether through force domination, physical intimidation, or just the sheer power that they possess.
So maybe that's the spectrum. On the dark end, you have this force domination where you're ripping information away without even compelling someone to give it up themselves. On the other side, you have uh, the greatest use of the mind trick in Attack of the Clones, where Obi-Wan Kenobi is just trying to, keep his subterfuge intact, not trying to be distracted, not trying to cause distraction in pursuit of his bounty hunter. And as a side effect, hopefully, is going to cause the intruder to think about their life and to hopefully go on a better journey. So, much like many things in Star Wars, it's a dichotomy of light and dark, of how these powers can be used, but used for just reasons rather than uh, more selfish ones.
Yeah, and I think the ethics can be and morality can be debated. Is it better to have to kill someone, or is it better to, um, use the Jedi mind trick to allow them to pass on by,
Mm-hmm.
perhaps having, for a time, limited their choices and their will, but ultimately having avoided a situation that would end in violence and grief for all involved.
And hopefully not allowing them to be beat or, you know, anything like you're bringing up from Knights of the Old Republic 2.
All right, well, that is our exploration of the Jedi mind trick and that's companion powers, the Force probe, the Force dominate. Thank you for joining us today.
And we'll see you next time.
All right, thank you so much.